Hi, this is Bryan Durren from Zombified Preachers of Gore, and today we're talking about Rot magazine. Specifically, issue number 1 of the 2 that we did. Despite not being seen by a ton of people at the time we did it, Rot has had a lasting impact on the Michigan and Detroit death metal scene. This video is a companion piece to sharing Rot digitally for the first time. A link to a flipbook of the issue is in the video's description. We invite you to check it out. But first, some of the backstory. 1990 and 1991 were a whirlwind couple of years for Rot, Zombified, and Michigan Death Fest 1 and 2. Here's a timeline to put it in perspective. In February 1990, Rot issue 1 came out. That helped us co-create the Michigan Death Fest, which took place in August of 1990. Right on the heels of that, in September 1990, Zombified's first tape, God's Vomit, came out. In early 1991, Rot number 2 came out, and by mid-1991, Zombified had signed with Wild Rags Records and released their self-titled EP. In November 1991, Zombified played Michigan Death Fest 2, but also in November 1991, the band broke up and wouldn't be heard from again until 2022. Getting back to the story of Rot number 1. In 1989, when Zombified was still figuring out what we were all about, vocalist Rich Bush and I decided to start the zine at the same time. He was 20 and I was 18. He and I were both big record and demo collectors and into tape trading as well. At the time, there weren't any zines in Detroit or Michigan that we knew of that focused exclusively on death metal, gore, and grindcore. If we missed anyone, please let us know. To get Rot started, we started reviewing things we already had in our collections, while we made additional connections. If we liked an album, demo, or zine, we'd share it in Rot. So the bands we featured were curated exactly to our tastes, which proved to be pretty good taste because many of the bands we covered became legendary, and a lot of them are still active today. Rich, who passed away from ALS in December of 2022, was fearless and could talk to anyone. Along the way, he connected with Roosevelt, the owner of Blondie's, Metal Mom, whose Double M Productions promoted Michigan Death Fest, as well as Richard C., the owner of Wild Rags Records. Those three helped Rich hook up with many of the bands that we interviewed. The Napalm Death interview was done while Mick Harris was in Florida with the band to record Harmony Corruption at Morris Sound Studio with Scott Burns. That album was released in July of 1990. Despite assuring us there won't ever be another Napalm Death lineup, Harmony Corruption ended up being Mick Harris' last album with the band. We spoke to Autopsy's Chris Riefert as they were coming off the release of their debut classic, Severed Survival. Atheist had just released their debut album, Piece of Time, when we interviewed vocalist-guitarist Kelly Schaefer. Unfortunately, their phenomenal bassist Roger Patterson would die in a car accident less than a year later. Drummer and vocalist Mike Browning from Nocturnus was interviewed prior to the release of the band's first album, The Key. We interviewed Nuclear Death's Lori Bravo shortly after the release of their debut LP, Bride of Insect. Also, we can't overstate the impact that Fatal had on our zine and our band. They were the first true death metal band to establish themselves in the Detroit area. And that's not forgetting the grind pioneers Repulsion from Flint, who helped us out tremendously as well. We interviewed Fatal for Rot number 1, and guitarist Tony Hamera engineered our second tape, which made a world of difference. Tony also remastered the entire Zombified catalog for the 2022 compilation CD, The Full Regurgitation. Thanks, Tony. Geeking out over some of the technical aspects of making the zine, we did as many of the interviews as we could via phone or in person. We both got these AT&T answering machines, which recorded on full-size cassette tapes. So we'd call the bands, record the call, then transcribe it. I'm guessing the process was uncommon for underground zines at the time. Many would do their interviews by mail, and we did as well. You'd send the band a bunch of typed or handwritten questions, then hopefully a band member writes their answers and sends it back. These type of interviews are fine, but they aren't super conversational because you don't have the ability to ask follow-up questions. And of course, doing this through the mail wasn't a very efficient process. Rich did most of the interviews, and that was for the best because he was such a natural at it. He was so quick-witted and funny. He ended up being the voice and personality of Rot, and Zombified too, really. Then I would bring the artwork and other ideas as my contribution. We both worked on typing up the pages, laying it out, and then I would add the aforementioned art stuff. The first issue was typed mostly on an old shitty typewriter, which is why you can hardly read it. Towards the end of the issue, we bought a more advanced Smith Corona from Montgomery Ward. It still kind of sucked, but at least you could make corrections. Before that, when we mistyped, we let out a big fuck, because we knew we'd have to redo that whole part, or just live with it. Here are some stats about Rot number 1. The bands and zines we featured represented 15 states, as well as 17 countries. There were about 19,000 words in the issue, 52 pages, 60 bands covered plus more in the ads, 52 reviews, and 8 interviews, put together by 2 guys who barely finished high school. And last but not least, let's not forget, one offensive crossword puzzle called Crassword. An interesting discovery was made after Rich's passing. His wife Sandy discovered a collection of his photos that had been tucked away in storage. Among those were forgotten Zombified and Michigan Death Fest pics. And there were also shots from a trip to Florida that Rich made in 1990. He connected with some absolute legends while he was there, including Dave Vincent from Morbid Angel, Kelly and Roger from Atheist, the guys from Nocturnus, as well as John Tardy from Obituary. The interesting thing is, I can't confirm why Rich was meeting those guys. Was he just saying hello, or watching him practice? Practice? He might have been interviewing him for Rot, or perhaps recruiting him for the Michigan Death Fest. Since both Atheist and Nocturnus were in Rot issue 1, Dave Vincent was interviewed in Rot number 2, and of course Morbid Angel ended up as the headliner for Michigan Death Fest 1. I have even less idea why John Tardy was there. Hey, but who's not going to share a picture of John Tardy? Shown here with Mike Browning from Nocturnus. So aside from that one small unsolved mystery, that's the story of Rot number 1. I'm really proud of what Rich and I were able to accomplish. In spite of having no idea what we were doing, it turned out we were doing just fine. Okay, don't forget to check out the flip book. A like, subscribe situation would be most appreciated. Until next time, don't forget that after you die, you rot. Take her easy.
And praise God. That